The arena is filled with an eager crowd. The hum of excitement drifts through the air like the buzzes of distant bees. But amidst all the chatter, she stands alone, her figure swallowed by the bright lights and the sea of expectant faces. The hum fades for a moment, as though the crowd senses her uncertainty. Her grip tightens around the leash. The leash. Not just any leash, but the one that ties her to him. Her German shepherd, the dog that has carried her through more battles than she's willing to admit. She breathes in, steadying herself. The air smells faintly of wood shavings and dog treats. Her eyes dart across the crowd, landing on a few skeptical faces. They don't know her. They don't understand why she's here. She doesn't belong. Not here. Not among people who haven't lived through the things she has. Her fingers twitch, and she feels the familiar tremble of anxiety creep up her spine. Focus, she whispers to herself, but the words don't seem to hold weight. Not when every inch of her being aches with the fear of judgment. Not when the crowd sees only a woman in a uniform, broken by time, lost in the shadows of a war that no one can ever truly understand. The German shepherd beside her stands tall, his fur glistening under the spotlight. He doesn't flinch. His eyes are calm, steady, like the anchor that keeps her grounded. But the moment she steps forward, the whispering begins, just loud enough for her to hear. She keeps her head low, the weight of the whispers pressing down on her shoulders like an anchor. She can't escape them, not now. She isn't supposed to be here. The silent judgment cuts deeper than any wound she's ever received in battle. And then it happens. Her German shepherd, the one thing in the world that has never let her down, steps forward with a sudden, unanticipated grace. As if sensing the exact moment her anxiety reaches its peak, he moves, quietly, confidently, through the crowd, leaving everyone in stunned silence. His movements are smooth, calculated. The crowd that had once whispered now watches in complete awe, but it's too late. The humiliation is done. Or is it? The veterans she met during her time in the army used to say that the hardest battle you face is the one you fight inside. It wasn't until years after her discharge that she understood what they meant. The silence is deafening. It's the loudest part of her life now. The noise of combat, the orders, the chaos, it's easy to live with. But the silence, it stretches endlessly, a vast and empty space she's been trying to fill for years. At first, the world outside her seemed like it had been carved from stone, unchanging and indifferent. The streets she once walked as a soldier now seemed too wide, too loud, full of people who don't understand the weight she carries. The weight of memories, the weight of regret, and worst of all, the weight of her own isolation. But there was something about her dog. Something about the way he never judged her, never asked questions. He didn't care if she cried in the middle of the night or if she kept to herself for days. He was there, patiently waiting, always offering the one thing that kept her from shattering completely unconditional love. The rescue dog she adopted all those years ago had been through battles of his own. Strays, abandoned, discarded, and somehow they found each other. Their bond wasn't just formed in shared pain, it was forged in a deeper understanding, something beyond words. It was this bond that kept her going when the days felt like they stretched on forever. It was this bond that made her stand at the entrance of the dog showcase. Despite the sinking feeling in her stomach, she didn't know if she belonged here. But for him, she would try. The dog showcase wasn't supposed to be like this. She had imagined it differently. No nerves, no doubts. Just her and her dog in perfect synchrony, showing the world what they could do. But that's not how it felt now. The moment she stepped on stage, the whispers began. At first, it was just a low murmur, but soon enough it became clear they didn't believe in her. Her heart hammered in her chest, the rhythm quick and erratic. She could hear the faint rustle of the crowd shifting in their seats. The dogs around her were trained, flawless. They moved with grace and precision, and their handlers seemed so confident, so at ease. She wasn't like them. Not in this place. Her German shepherd, however, stayed calm by her side. His eyes, always steady, met hers, grounding her in a way nothing else could. She could feel his strength even now, even under the weight of the judgment that hung thick in the air. He didn't need her to perform. He just needed her to trust him. But the crowd, they weren't so understanding. Their eyes lingered on her, scrutinizing every movement, waiting for her to make a mistake. Her anxiety tightened like a vice around her chest. She could feel the sweat pooling at the back of her neck, but she couldn't wipe it away. Not now. In that moment, she felt smaller than she ever had before. Every movement felt stiff, calculated, and then she froze. Her dog was still by her side, but the energy in the air shifted. The moment stretched longer than she could bear. The whispers got louder. She had failed. There were moments when the world seemed to fall away, when she was alone, just her and her dog facing the shadows. It wasn't always easy. The nights were the hardest, when the weight of the day's memories bore down on her like 1,000 stones. But he was there, his head resting on her lap, his warmth a small comfort in the cold silence of the night. The flashbacks were sudden. Memories of the battlefield, the sounds of gunfire, the screams of soldiers caught in the chaos. It was all still there, floating just below the surface. But her dog, with his gentle eyes and his silent understanding, was always there to pull her back. When she couldn't sleep, when the nightmares came crashing down on her, he was the only thing that kept her grounded. They were both survivors, and together they learned how to heal. It wasn't quick, and it wasn't easy, but every day they took small steps toward understanding, toward peace. She found solace in the simple acts, feeding him, walking him, talking to him. He listened, as always. It wasn't about winning any competitions or proving anyone wrong. It was about surviving together. He was her anchor, and she was his protector. Through the darkness, they made their way forward, one quiet step at a time. But today something shifted. The show wasn't just a contest. It was a test of everything she had ever struggled to overcome. And with her dog by her side, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one who had something to prove. She stood there, the center of attention, but not in the way she had imagined. The crowd's eyes were fixed on her, judging every move. But then she glanced at her dog, and in that moment everything changed. Her German shepherd, steady and strong, looked at her with those calm, knowing eyes. He knew her better than anyone, and he knew exactly what she needed. With a subtle nod of his head, he stepped forward, breaking the tension with a quiet, powerful grace. The crowd fell silent, not out of judgment but awe. They watched as the dog, once astray, now moved with the precision of a trained champion. His movements were smooth, effortless. There was no hesitation, no misstep. He was a reflection of the strength she hadn't yet seen in herself. For a moment, the world around them blurred. The whispers stopped. The judgment faded into the background. All that mattered was the bond between them, the silent understanding, the trust, the love. The judges were speechless. The crowd was mesmerized. But all she could see was her dog, moving through the arena like he had been born for this moment. And for the first time that day, she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time: pride. When the final note of the showcase ended, the arena was still. No applause, no cheers. Just the silence that had hung over her for so long, now replaced with something new: respect. The crowd didn't know her story. They didn't know the battles she had fought, the nights she had spent lying awake, haunted by the past. But they saw her now. They saw the strength in her dog, the strength in her. She turned to her German shepherd, her partner, her protector. He was still by her side, his steady presence the one thing she could always rely on. In his eyes, she saw everything she needed to see. They had both come a long way. And as the crowd stood, not with loud cheers, but in quiet recognition, she felt something she hadn't in a long time, a sense of belonging. Not because of the applause, but because she knew, deep down, that she had finally found her place in the world. Together they had faced the past, the present, and whatever the future held. And for the first time, it didn't matter what anyone else thought. It was her and him forever. And with that, the world around her seemed to fall away, leaving only the sound of her dog's steady breathing beside her. The walk back to the car was quiet, but it was the kind of silence that didn't feel heavy. It was peaceful. She could hear the soft scrape of her boots on the pavement, the occasional rustle of a leaf in the wind. The air had cooled after the day's heat, and she could feel the crispness of evening settling in. It was a relief, like a fresh start after a long, drawn-out struggle. Her German shepherd walked beside her, his paw steps nearly synchronized with hers. She could feel the weight of the leash in her hand, but it no longer felt like a tether to an obligation. It felt like a symbol of their shared journey, as if their struggles were not just hers but his too. She glanced down at him. His fur glowed in the low light, and his eyes, those soft, wise eyes, met hers with a quiet understanding that went deeper than words. They had been through so much together. There were moments when she felt like she was drowning in her past, but his presence had always kept her afloat. She remembered the early days when she'd first brought him home. She'd been so broken, so unsure of everything. She hadn't known how to heal, how to move forward, but he had, in his own quiet way, taught her how to love again. As they reached the car, she opened the door, and he jumped in without hesitation. She followed him, her hand on the door, pausing for a moment to look around the empty parking lot. The world felt different now, lighter. The weight of the competition, of the judgment, had been left behind on that stage. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about their bond, their strength. She had proven something not to the crowd, but to herself. She started the engine, and the soft hum of the car filled the silence. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows along the road. She drove in silence for a while, the sound of her dog's quiet breathing the only thing breaking the stillness. But there was something else now. A sense of hope, quiet but persistent, growing in her chest. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was on the right path, not because of any accolade, but because she was beginning to see the worth of her journey. Her eyes flickered to the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of her reflection. She looked tired, but she also looked stronger than she had in years. The woman she had been seemed distant, like a version of herself that no longer fit. This new version of her, this woman who had faced her past and stood tall in the face of judgment, was the one she had always hoped to become. And as the car glided down the road, a soft smile tugged at her lips. The journey wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to take whatever came next, and beside her, her German shepherd lay quietly in the back seat, his eyes closed, his presence a steady reminder that they would face the future together. Weeks passed. The showcase had become a fading memory, and life resumed its natural rhythm. But she knew that something inside her had shifted. There was no grand announcement, no moment of epiphany, just the slow, steady realization that she wasn't the same woman she had been before. Her dog had always been a constant, but now he was more than just a companion. He was her heart's compass. The house was quieter than usual, the air still holding traces of the summer heat, but it felt different now. She had always carried the weight of the past with her, but now it was like the air itself had lightened, the walls had softened. She sat on the couch, her dog resting by her side. He had been her rock, her silent support in the darkest moments, but now they were both healing. She ran her fingers through his fur, the familiar comfort of his warmth reminding her that she wasn't alone. It had taken years to get to this point. Years of silent struggle, of battling demons no one could see. But here, in this small moment of peace, she felt like she had finally found a kind of home. Not just the one made of brick and mortar, but the one inside herself, the one where she had learned to forgive, to heal, and to love again. Her phone buzzed, snapping her back to reality. It was a message from one of the judges at the dog showcase. At first, she hesitated, unsure of what it might say. But when she opened it, she saw that it was a simple message of praise. Nothing grand, just a few kind words about her and her dog's performance. They had seen something in them that she hadn't seen in herself. For a moment, she sat there, staring at the message. It wasn't just the compliment that moved her. It was the fact that someone had noticed. For so long, she had lived in the shadows of her own mind, thinking that her worth was determined by how the world saw her. But now she knew the truth. Her worth was in the bond she shared with her dog, and in the strength she had found within herself. She smiled and placed the phone down, looking at her dog as he shifted beside her. He lifted his head and looked at her, his eyes calm and understanding. There was no need for words. He already knew. And with that she knew too. She was ready. Ready for whatever came next. Because she wasn't just a soldier, a veteran, a woman who had been broken. She was someone who had learned to rise again. With her dog by her side, there was nothing she couldn't face. The journey would continue, but now, with a heart full of hope and a companion who would never leave her side, she knew the path ahead would be one she could walk with strength. It was a calm afternoon when she received an unexpected invitation. The local shelter had reached out, asking if she would be willing to speak at an event for veterans and their dogs. The request was simple, but the weight it carried was anything but. She had never thought of herself as a speaker, someone to share her story. She had always preferred the quiet spaces, the moments that went unnoticed. But now, standing at the crossroads of this new chapter in her life, she realized that she couldn't hide anymore. The shelter had been part of her journey too. It was where she had first met her dog, the place where she had found him when she was at her lowest. It had been a chance encounter, an unexpected meeting that changed her life. And now, here she was, standing at the threshold of something new. As the day of the event drew closer, she practiced her speech in the quiet of her living room. Her dog sat beside her, as always, his steady presence a source of comfort. The words came slowly at first, hesitant, unsure. But as she spoke, she felt the truth of it rise within her. She wasn't just telling her story for the crowd. She was telling it for herself. The day of the event arrived, and she stood before the crowd, her dog by her side, the familiar weight of his presence grounding her. The crowd was larger than she had expected, their faces eager and curious. She took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the room, and then she began to speak. Her voice was steady now, her words flowing freely. She spoke of the struggles she had faced, the battles both on and off the field. She spoke of the bond she shared with her dog, of how they had healed together, and of the quiet strength that had carried her through the darkest days. As she finished, there was a pause, a stillness that seemed to linger in the air, and then the applause began, slow at first, then building. She looked out at the crowd, their faces full of respect, and she felt something inside her shift again. This time, it wasn't just about healing. It was about sharing that healing, about giving others the strength to rise. And as the applause filled the room, she felt it. Her place in the world, no longer defined by the echoes of her past, but by the strength she had found within herself and the dog who had never given up on her. She wasn't just a veteran anymore. She was a survivor, and this was her story. The weeks following the speech were a blur. The event at the shelter had sparked something in her, a sense of purpose that she hadn't realized was missing. People reached out, some veterans, some just strangers, all with their own stories, their own battles. But in their eyes, she saw something familiar, the same uncertainty she had felt, the same quiet desperation. She spent hours talking to them, offering advice, sharing what little wisdom she had gained from her own journey. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She found herself reconnecting with a part of her she thought she'd lost. The part that cared, that wanted to help, that believed in the possibility of something better. Her dog was with her through it all, of course. He was there, as he always had been, lying by her side while she typed out messages, answered calls, or simply listened to the stories of others. His presence was a constant, a steady reminder that they had survived together. He had never asked for anything more than her company, and in return, he had given her everything. But even as she reached out to others, the quiet moments, the ones when it was just her and her dog, began to feel different. They were no longer just two lost souls wandering through life. They were something more. They were a team, bound by experiences that had shaped them both, and that bond, deep and unspoken, was the foundation of her strength. It wasn't just the dog anymore. It wasn't just her past. It was them together, making a life out of the pieces they had been given. She had found something she hadn't expected, healing in the shared quiet of the night, strength in the soft sound of his breathing as they both settled into sleep. The road ahead was long, and there would always be new challenges. But for the first time, she felt ready for it, ready to face whatever came next. She wasn't just a woman standing alone anymore. She had a purpose, a voice, and the unbreakable bond of a dog who had taught her what true loyalty meant. And so, together, They walked into the future, one quiet step at a time. Her German shepherd's head rested gently on her lap, his eyes half closed in peaceful contentment, while she looked ahead, knowing that whatever the future held, they would face it as they always had, side by side. As the months passed, she continued to speak at events, small gatherings of veterans and their families. Each time, her story felt a little more solidified, a little more real. She had always thought of herself as a soldier in the past tense, but now she realized that her battle was ongoing. It wasn't about the medals or the recognition. It was about the lives she was touching, the hope she was passing along to others who were still fighting. One day, as she sat in a quiet park with her dog, a young woman approached her, holding a leash with a nervous, looking dog by her side. She introduced herself, hesitantly explaining that she had heard about the events, about the woman who had overcome her own struggles with the help of her dog. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," the young woman confessed, her voice trembling slightly. Her dog, sensing the moment, stepped forward, his eyes meeting the young woman's, offering that quiet assurance he had given her all those years ago. Without saying a word, he sat down next to her, his presence steady and comforting. The young woman smiled faintly, her hand reaching down to pet him. "I wish I had that kind of strength," she whispered, her voice catching. The veteran smiled softly, her gaze shifting to her own dog. "You do," she replied, her voice steady and sure. "Sometimes, it just takes finding the right person, or the right dog, to remind you of it." She watched as the young woman's face softened, as the weight she had been carrying seemed to ease ever so slightly. In that moment, she realized something important. She wasn't just healing herself. She was creating a ripple, a legacy of strength, resilience, and love that was far greater than anything she had ever expected to leave behind. Her dog sat proudly beside her, and for a brief moment, she saw her own reflection in the young woman's eyes. A reflection of hope, of healing, and of the quiet strength that could come from the unlikeliest of places. As the young woman walked away, her dog now at her side, the veteran felt a quiet sense of peace settle over her. The legacy of her story, of her bond with her dog, was unfolding in front of her in ways she hadn't anticipated. It was no longer just about one woman's journey. It was about the countless others who would find their way, one step at a time, with a dog by their side. She looked down at her German shepherd, his eyes full of quiet understanding. They had made it through so much together, and now they were leaving something behind. Something that would continue to grow, far beyond the walls they had once been trapped within. And as they walked on, the soft rustling of leaves in the wind seemed to carry their story forward into the future, where hope and healing would always have a place waiting. The seasons shifted, as they always do, but this time it felt different. The air grew colder as autumn settled over the city, and the leaves turned shades of amber and gold, fluttering gently to the ground. Yet, despite the change in the weather, there was a warmth that lingered around her, a quiet kind of peace she had never known before. Her dog, her constant, her anchor, was beside her through it all. His presence had become a natural part of her every day, like the very air she breathed. Every morning, they walked together, sometimes in silence, sometimes with a shared glance that said more than words ever could. His fur, now thick with the changing season, brushed against her as they moved through the park, their feet crunching over the fallen leaves. She had started volunteering at the local shelter, helping other veterans and their families find the same bond she had found with her dog. It wasn't just about the dogs. It was about giving people a chance to heal, a chance to reclaim something they thought they had lost. Every person she met brought a new story, a new battle they were fighting, and she realized that every one of them, in their own way, was searching for the same thing: connection. It was on one of these days, while she was at the shelter, that she met a young man who was fresh from his deployment. His eyes were haunted, tired, the same way hers had once been. He walked in, head down, unsure of what to expect. But when he saw her dog, something shifted in him. His gaze lingered on the dog, on the bond between them, and he hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper as he asked, "How do you do it?" The question wasn't just about the dog. It was about everything: The pain, the memories, the constant fight. She didn't have an immediate answer. But she knew what had worked for her, the bond she had with her dog, the patience it took to heal, the simple act of showing up even when it seemed impossible. "One step at a time," she said quietly, her voice steady. "And a dog who understands you in ways no one else can." It was the truth. Her dog had been the one constant, the one piece of her life that had never judged, never faltered. He had been her guide, and now, in this moment, she realized he was guiding others too. She watched as the young man slowly approached the row of dogs, his hands trembling slightly as he reached out to pet one of them. His face softened just a little, and she could see it. The shift, the moment when he realized that maybe, just maybe, there was hope. As the day ended and the shelter began to empty, she stood at the door, her German shepherd by her side. She had always believed that her purpose was to find her own healing, but now she saw that her true purpose was to pass that healing on. She didn't just have to help herself anymore. She had the power to help others, to be the bridge between their struggles and the peace she had found. Her dog nudged her side gently, his fur brushing against her, grounding her once again. She reached down and patted him softly, her heart full. "We're making a difference, aren't we?" she whispered. He looked up at her, his eyes full of quiet understanding, as if to say, "Yes, we are." The months passed, and as the world around her continued to turn, she felt the weight of her past slowly lift. The shadows that had once clung to her, whispering doubts and fears, were fading into the background. In their place, a new sense of self had emerged. A woman who had been broken but had rebuilt herself. A woman who now understood that healing wasn't a destination, but a journey. Her dog, the same one who had saved her from the darkness, had become more than just a companion. He had become a symbol of resilience, of hope, of the strength that could be found even in the most unexpected places. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, she and her dog took their usual walk through the park. The air was crisp, and the sky was painted in shades of pink and orange. They stopped at the same bench they had visited countless times, the one where she had once sat, full of doubts, unsure of what her future would hold. Now, she sat there with a calm certainty, knowing that whatever lay ahead, she was ready. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into that dog showcase months ago. She wasn't the woman who had felt so small, so invisible. She was someone who had learned to stand tall, to find her voice, to embrace her scars as part of her story. Her German shepherd lay beside her, his head resting on her lap. She ran her fingers through his fur, the familiar sensation grounding her. Together, they had walked through the fire and come out stronger. And now, as the sun set, painting the world in soft golden light, she felt the peace that had once seemed so far away wash over her. She looked down at him, and he raised his head, his eyes meeting hers. In that moment, she knew that they had become a part of something much bigger than themselves. They had created a bond that transcended time, a bond that would continue long after the world had moved on. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved me?" Her dog looked up at her, his eyes filled with quiet understanding. And for a moment, as the world around them faded into the distance, they were just two souls, forever connected, forever changed. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon, they stood together, ready to face whatever came next. Together, they had learned that healing was possible. And that, in the end, was all that truly mattered. As the seasons turned, she found herself standing at a new crossroads in life, but this time, the weight was different. Lighter, somehow. The shadows that once seemed to haunt every step she took had faded into the background, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. Her dog, her loyal companion, was more than just her strength now. He was the embodiment of their shared journey. The struggles, the healing, the unspoken bond that had carried them through the darkest times. Together they had proven that even in the deepest silence, there could be understanding, that through the pain, there could be peace. And most of all, that no battle was ever truly fought alone. She stood at the edge of the park, her dog by her side, his fur glowing softly in the last light of the day. The world around her was quieter now, as if it too understood the weight of the journey they had shared. The crowds, the judgment, the whispers, None of it mattered anymore. She had discovered something far more important: the power of love, the strength of resilience, and the beauty of a bond that, once forged, could never be broken. With a gentle breath, she felt the weight of her past dissolve into the air, leaving only the present moment filled with quiet hope. As her dog nudged her hand, she smiled softly. They had made it. Not because the world had changed, but because they had changed together, one small, steady step at a time. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow on the path ahead, she knew this was just the beginning. The world was hers to face, and with him by her side, she was ready.